Moana, ina reo, e te iwi, e te motu, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. Thank you for the opportunity to speak today, and can I please start by acknowledging mana whenua, ngā Pōtiki, Tauranga Moana, Tauranga Tangata. All of those that put conferences like this together is always a big event in itself, and the sponsors and others that have been contributing. It is great to be here to discuss the significant work that the government is doing to support vulnerable New Zealanders, and to thank you, of course, for the great work that you do. I know that Minister Flavell, that Te Roroa, will be speaking to you later on this afternoon about the Māori housing strategy that he leads across government, and how the government is working on better housing outcomes for Māori. So I'm going to speak about the wider social housing program that's going on nationally and for all New Zealanders. Can I start by saying you play an incredibly important role in our communities, and the government recognises and respects that. Indeed, we encourage it, because we want to ensure as many New Zealanders as need it benefit from your expertise, your experience, and your compassion. We know that government does not have a monopoly on good ideas, advice, and expertise, and we understand that to address the issues that our nation faces, we must all work together with the strengths that we have. It goes without saying that those of you working in the community right at the coalface know your communities best and can deliver the services that your communities need. That's why the government's social housing reform program includes growing the community housing sector. By giving you more funding and resources, more opportunity and support, we can harness your good ideas and expertise so that it can help even more of our more vulnerable people. It is not an easy task. I think we all agree housing is a complex issue. We deal with real people and their real issues, which means simple housing solutions on their own are never going to be a nice, neat, tidy little fix. There are many moving parts which all need to be dealt with separately and then fitted together so that all the levers that I'm pulling work as they are meant to. When it comes down to it, my focus is on getting people who are in critical need somewhere warm, dry and safe to live, addressing their issues and then moving them into permanent housing. We need land, we need houses, and we need community involvement. Simply put, my mantra for social housing is the right person in the right place for the right length of time and at the right price. Today, I'm going to outline how the government is making all parts of this housing machine work together. So we acknowledge that many New Zealanders are concerned about housing and housing affordability, from enough quality rentals to more affordable homes for first home buyers and more housing for those that need a hand up. The government is acutely aware of New Zealanders who need more support, from emergency housing right through to permanent housing. Let me be clear, it is not right that people live on the street, in cars, garages and overcrowded homes. It simply should not happen in our society, and we take this issue extremely seriously. We feel very strongly the responsibility to make sure we are meeting the needs of our most vulnerable. I asked the Prime Minister for this job as the Minister of Social Housing because I saw the need for it, and it's the first time we've had this specific role in Cabinet. As a former Minister of Social Development, I know it starts at home. I know that without somewhere warm, dry and stable and safe to live, children won't do as well in school and they won't be as healthy or as well settled, and their parents won't have the ability to go into paid work or get further ahead or live independently. Older New Zealanders or those with complex needs won't get the support they need, or the support they are receiving won't be as effective if they don't have somewhere to call home. A stable home with appropriate wraparound support is important in helping people get on their feet because, as you know, a lack of housing is sometimes not the root of the whole problem. It can be a symptom of underlying issues such as trouble finding work, an absence of life skills, mental health issues, drug and alcohol abuse, or problems with the law, and for some people even a combination of all of them. As Social Housing Minister, I have two challenges. They are people challenges and they are building challenges. That's why I've got a strong focus not just on getting the stock of social houses right, whether they are government or community owned, but also working with community housing providers to make real long-term improvements in people's lives. Social housing is a large part of what the government does. Last year, taxpayers spent $766 million on income-related rent subsidies to support people living in social housing. This year, we've increased that to more than $826 million. When you combine it with the accommodation supplement to support people who are in private rentals, taxpayers will spend close to $2 billion on rental subsidies this year. A rough calculation makes that more than $800 from every working person in the country. That money is hard earned, so it is our duty to spend it well and to ensure that we are delivering the maximum benefit to vulnerable New Zealanders. The Prime Minister announced the government's social housing reform program at the start of last year, and that remains the foundations for our efforts. These reforms, which build on social sector work, on our social sector work in a number of areas over a number of years, are aimed squarely at improving the circumstances of vulnerable New Zealanders who need our help, and everything we do is with that in mind. The Prime Minister set out 5 objectives, a 5-point plan that often gets lost in the public and political debate, so let me reiterate those points. The first is to ensure people who need housing support from government can get it. Second, to help social housing tenants to independence where that's appropriate. Third, to ensure properties used for social housing are of the right size and configuration and are in the right places. Fourth, to establish affordable housing supply, particularly in Auckland. And finally, to encourage more diverse ownership of social housing. And we are making good progress in all of those areas. It's an ambitious work program, and I'd like to recap some of the things we've brought in and how they fit together to achieve those goals. As I said, a fundamental part of the program is growing the community housing sector to ensure that more people receive the best possible support. We have made the Ministry of Social Development the purchaser of social housing and opened up the income-related rent subsidy to community housing providers, not just Housing New Zealand. This is a major change in our social housing system and a significant opportunity for organisations in this room. But it isn't just about making the income-related rent subsidy available to providers. Earlier this month, I announced an extra funding of $24.4 million for community housing providers on top of the $120 million announced in the budget. That's a total of $144.5 million, with the aim of getting more community housing providers to grow their stock. Now, providers building new social housing, in Auckland in particular, can now get an upfront grant of up to 50% of the value of the development, or a weekly grant of up to 50% of market rent on top of the current rental subsidies that the government provides. That's 150% of the market rent that a provider can get, or they can get a combination of both. So you could get some of that funding up front to help with the deposit for the redevelopment, for example, and then get, say, 120% each week, that 20% that you can use for actual tenancy management and to provide wraparound services. And it really does give that financial support for the provider to actually make sure that the tenants are being well looked after. And we're making progress, but we are continuing to keep our focus. Over the last year, we have increased the number of homes from community housing providers from 110 to 244 places. The Ministry of Social Development estimates that we'll have at least 2,500 new places in the pipeline in Auckland over the next 3 years from Housing New Zealand and community housing providers. We want more diversity in our social housing sector across emergency, medium-term and permanent housing. You will be aware that we are progressing with the transfer of more than 1,000 Housing New Zealand properties in Tauranga to a community housing provider. The reason for this is simple. Hand over the running of social housing to those organisations who are committed to their communities and who can show us better ways of managing tenants and upgrading houses. I also want to reiterate that the properties will have to stay in social housing unless the government agrees otherwise, and the only case that they wouldn't is if we genuinely didn't need them because we had so many more first home buyers that people were in their own homes. And existing tenants will be housed for the duration of their need. I can already say that part of the contract that they have is that they will be doubling the number of tenancy managers. So if you like, lowering that ratio of tenancy manager to tenants, double what Housing New Zealand have. So already you can see that better services coming along for tenants. This process is demonstrating the benefit of having new, innovative ways of working with tenants, and I look forward to the transfer being finalised in the next few months. Housing New Zealand is investing heavily in its housing stock to get the right houses of the right size in the right place to meet the current demand. When we started these reforms, about a third of its stock was in the wrong place or was the wrong size, and we're turning that around. We have more properties coming on stream all of the time, big and small developments, and we are ramping this up daily. In the last 2 months alone, Housing New Zealand has bought, built or redeveloped 55 new homes, 43 of these have been in Auckland. One example is Waterview, Auckland, where 6 old houses are making way now for 17 new and modern houses. Another is New Lynn, where there are 7 homes on a site where there were only 3 before. We've just announced the redevelopment of 300 Housing New Zealand properties into about 1,200 homes in Northcote. This $750 million project will transform them into more homes that are a better mix of size and type and are warmer, drier and healthier. We will also have a mix in that of social housing, affordable houses for first-time homeowners and some that are at market. Northcote is the latest example of the government's work to develop its own land to accelerate the supply of new houses. Others are, of course, in Tamaki and Mount Roskill redevelopments, which will literally deliver hundreds of new homes. So it's clear we're making progress in this area, but there is still more to come. Freeing up existing properties for those in the greatest need, I think, is critical. We need to ensure that valuable social housing space is not taken up by people who don't need the support at the expense of those that do. For example, it makes no sense to have someone who can't afford market rent living alone, living alone in a 3-bedroom subsidised property. To be frank, we need to free that house up for a family. We've completed nearly 3,000 tenancy reviews, resulting in 788 people moving into alternative accommodation, and another 113 people have then gone on to buy their own home. So they've been in a Housing New Zealand house with access to the kinds of supports and Home Start and extra support there. They've managed to go on and purchase their own properties. We have also made payments of $2.2 million to help people with costs such as bonds, letting fees, moving assistance and so on. We're helping people to move out of Auckland where the need is more acute and into areas where there are jobs and more houses, giving them more opportunities to get ahead. Housing New Zealand is working on reducing the time properties are vacant between tenancies. It has also put hundreds of long-term vacant properties back into the letting pool, 247 just last week. And it is continuing a program to add two-bedroom homes on the back of existing properties. It aims to add another 65 two-bedroom homes by the end of this year. Housing New Zealand is also working with a panel to look at the safe meth limit in properties. We know, or I know, still trying to convince all the officials, that the bar is probably set too high. And this is keeping properties vacant. But, as they remind me, Housing New Zealand has a duty of care to its tenants and its contractors in both health and safety, and so we must ensure that we are getting that standard right and ensuring the properties are fit to be lived in. House prices are putting additional pressures on our poorest families. It is part of the reason why we have seen greater demand for emergency housing over the last year. So I'd like to end by talking a bit about emergency housing. When I talk about emergency housing, I'm talking about support for individuals and families who, for any number of reasons, have nowhere else to live. There have always been people in this situation in our society, and there always will be. Our focus is, of course, on delivering safe, warm, permanent housing, but we must respond to any need for short-term accommodation for people in unexpected and difficult circumstances. The people and organisations in this room are helping us support these people in their time of need. And I can assure you this is something that the government is doing something about. As I said earlier, this isn't just about providing houses, it is about supporting people. The $41 million I announced in the budget to fund emergency places has so far delivered more than 3,000 places a year, and we're currently looking for more. That budget funding also provides for the new non-recoverable and special needs grant, which meets the costs of emergency housing for people unable to immediately access a contracted place, and Work and Income has made hundreds of grants since they were introduced on the 1st of July. You will have heard about the $9 million we're putting into two innovative ideas that will help community organisations help people into housing and then sustain their tenancies. You will be familiar with Housing First, many of you, which works with those who are chronically homeless, works with the chronic homeless. It is operating successfully in Hamilton under the People's Project, and we are trialling this approach in Auckland. If it helps get people into housing and keep them there, which I am optimistic and all overseas evidence says that it will, it is a model that we can look at rolling out across the country. We have also put money towards helping those people whose tenancies are balanced on a knife edge because of other issues. Antisocial behaviour, severe rent arrears, problems that would otherwise see them evicted from their homes. We're saying to community providers, help us to help them and give them a second chance. So over the coming months, we will deliver even more emergency and medium-term housing places over and above the more than 3,000 places we funded in this budget. We'll be pulling a number of levers that include buying motels, leasing suitable houses, and building new ones. There are pockets of land the government has reserved for schools, hospitals and transport to be built over the next 10 to 20 years that are sitting empty right now. We've effectively land banked them. So we will be putting modular housing and what I call fast stick builds on these sites to meet the current temporary need. Modular housing is a fantastic solution to getting more housing, getting it fast and getting it at a reasonable price, and also it's done within the regions predominantly of New Zealand, so that means jobs in those regions and more going in locally too. Simply put, we'll get more bang for our buck and faster with modular housing. So far I have 3 sites in Auckland that will support more than 100 modular homes for emergency and medium-term housing, and we have other suitable sites, and this work will continue. An example of using vacant Crown land for housing is the education site in Luke Street in Otahu, Auckland. It is not needed by education for a number of years, so has been leased to Housing New Zealand. So I'm pleased to announce today that a fast stick build will begin next month on a 51 home development at the site to house families off the social housing register. The Luke Street development will have 27 two-bed, 7 three-bedroom and 17 four-bedroom homes. Once complete, the development will provide temporary homes for up to 250 people at any one time. This translates to hundreds more places each year. We expect families to literally be moving in by February next year. There will be an on-site manager and providing support and services to the tenants, including those intensive wraparound. And this is where community providers come in. I'm calling today to them to put their hands up to manage tenants at developments like Luke Street that we're going to be having happening over the upcoming months. The government can offer its support, expertise and resources, but as I said, I think it's community providers are the people who know their communities best and can be on site and offering the kind of services that these people need. I welcome your involvement and encourage you in the work you are already doing. I say let's work together to help our vulnerable people into safe, warm and stable homes and keep them there. Thank you.